In 1789, he published his very first book. Like any of us, we would love to be published. And like any of us, he hoped that his words would have an impact. In 1807, the impact was made clear. The abolishment of slavery in Britain came about partially because of his own autobiography. Because this man was an African who, when he was 11, was kidnapped and sold and taken to Barbados. But after 2 or 3 owners, he had one who allowed him to buy his freedom. And he moved to London. And he wrote his autobiography. And in that autobiography, he detailed in words what his life had been like. And it changed the public sentiment. And because of that, because of how seminal and critical his work was, the movement begun and was reinforced to ultimately abolish slavery. She was a 5th grade teacher, and she'd spent years teaching, and she loved 5th grade. You know, these were kids that knew things and they could talk. And in 1975, these were kids that didn't show up with cigarettes or guns. And so it was easy, or easier, to be a teacher. But in 1975, the principal asked her as a favor to take on a kindergarten class. Anytime you put a 5th grade teacher in a kindergarten class, you got to wonder, how's this going to work? And she told me something in kindergarten that has stayed with me ever since. She couldn't help but be a 5th grade teacher, even though she was teaching kindergartners. She wanted to make sure everyone knew how to read. And she wanted us reading books, not the book, the autobiography of a former slave, but books. And she highlighted that if you read these books, you'd be part of a growing community of people that read this work. And over more and more years, authors' words would have an impact. And so she said to me, words have impact. This afternoon, I hope that if you take nothing else from what I share with you today, it's that you take away this one truth, not original to me, but very much in line with the underlying driver behind the success of WordPress, to democratize publishing. Why would you want to democratize publishing? Because words count. And because you can have an impact with your words. And this afternoon, what I want to do is spend some time talking with you about your words and how you can have an impact and you can have influence. So let's get started. And to do that, I need to make sure this computer stays alive and awake and shows you these slides. If you watched television in 1975, what you would know is that Nike would tell you about Nike on TV. And when Nike told you about Nike, Nike was the voice. There were no other voices that were given the ability to speak. Nike was the one that had the money. And in those days, it was all about money. And Nike could take their money and they could invest in print ads, media buys, and Nike could tell you, our brand is what we tell you our brand is. And for us, as people who watched the TV commercials or people who read the magazines, we just said, okay. My brother, when he was 10, took a 4Runner, one of those 4-wheel motorcycles, out in the desert with friends, flipped it over, it landed on his leg, and when it landed on his leg, it broke his ankle at the growth plate. And when it broke his ankle at the growth plate, especially when he was 10, that was a precarious issue because you didn't know how much more growth was going to happen right there. And because you didn't know if you were going to have two legs that were different lengths. Because you didn't know that, you had to go to UCLA, where the world premier specialist, Dr. Rushilevsky, was there to evaluate and determine what you should do. And Dr. Rushilevsky suggested that my brother cut his good leg at the growth plate so that both legs would be the same length. This is what you do in 1982. Fortunately, my dad was Latino. And he said, "Thank you very much for your opinion. I'd like to go get someone else's." Because the logic didn't stand with him, and it turned out, just 3 years later, not only were his legs the same size, but he started cross-country running. And when he went running, he had to decide what running shoe to buy. And if you were, in 1982, making a decision, or 1983, about what shoes to buy, what would you do? Well, you'd have read magazines and you'd have watched TV, and the company would have told you what was the best shoe. And because Nike had the money, Nike could tell you its brand, and you would take it. In those days, you walked into a Foot Locker, and you looked at all the shoes, and guess what? Most of the shoes were Nike. How many of you run? You can tell I don't, so I'm raising my hand just to guide you. Those of you that run, how many of you wear Nikes to run? A lot less. Today, if you go to Google and search best running shoe, one of the links you'll find is Amazon. And when you click on Amazon, you'll be taken directly to a page at Amazon where, shockingly, a majority of Amazon's content is user-defined content. 3/4 of every Amazon page is user-defined content, and that's what you and I value. We value the words of others to help us make decisions, and it's no longer Nike telling us what they want to tell us about their brand. And so guess what happens? You get to the top 10 best-selling shoes for runners at Amazon, only 2 of them, towards the bottom of the pile, are Nike. Because there are other shoes that are better. And they may not spend the same amount of money that Nike did. In those days, your brand, if you were an organization or even a person, your brand is what you said it was because you said it. And nobody else had the money or the place to say differently. Today, that's not the case. Today, the brand is what we say it is. Nike is what we say it is. Brooks or anybody else is what we say it is. Because we have channels to communicate. Social media and the web are places where we get to write our opinions and our articles. And there are runners who write running blogs. I don't read them, but they're there. And you could read them. And you could discover what they have to say. And you could find authentic voices that guide you and suggest an influence. Because words have impact. Words count. And your words can count. This fundamental shift from having a singular voice with a lot of money articulate a brand message to now that brand having a lot less impact because all of us have a diffused ability to have smaller and yet powerful voices in a distributed network, these powerful things connected with tubes called the internet. You didn't get the tubes thing? At home, thank you. I heard you laughing. This internet dynamic requires a fundamental strategy shift. One towards something we call content management, and a content marketing strategy. And WordPress is perfect to equip us in that dynamic. So what we're going to do over the next few minutes is talk about how you build a brand, how you can grow and ultimately establish a brand through the use of your own writing, through the use of a blog. Now, you don't have to just use a blog. You can use other tools to do it. But fundamentally, today, I'm going to talk to you here about 6 things that you need to worry about. These things right here. But before I do, I want to highlight something to you. Brand equity is a lot like fame. It's something that happens, it's not something you do. It's like when people call you on the phone, and how many of you have had people call you up and say, I want you to make this go viral? Right? Some of you are liars, because there's a lot more of you that have heard clients say that, right? I want it to go viral. I don't control that. I want to SEO this. I don't even understand what that means. I should call an SEO expert to tell me how you SEO something. I don't control whether or not a search engine is optimized to bring me to the surface of page 1. I don't control that. And I don't control fame. And ultimately, I don't control brand equity. My brand is now in your hands. And your brand and your company's brands are in others' hands. And what I want to do is highlight to you that brands work fundamentally the same way as fame does. You're going to get famous because of something you do, not because you just pursue fame. And you're going to develop brand equity because of what you do, not because you just focus on brand. To that end, these are the 6 things I think you need to get right. These are the 6 things I've seen other people get right. And for today, I'll tell you, these are the 6 things I've spent the last 3 years working on to get right. Let's get into it. The first is audience. I tell people, if you're going to start a blog, be as specific as you can possibly be to find a niche audience. That means if you're a mommy blogger, find a corner you can take that is, I blog for moms who have daughters who are left-handed, who like to write poetry, but only in dark rooms. That's a niche. Don't say, I'm a mom. I'm a mom won't get you any corner out there. And if you're going to take a corner, it's a lot easier to take a corner no one's taking. If you're going to take a corner that no one's fighting for, because it's a lot cheaper. When I stepped into the WordPress community, there wasn't a lot of dialogue around business. There were some folks that were doing amazing stuff, but there wasn't a lot of dialogue around it, and I thought, that's a corner I can take. And you know why it was so easy to take it? Because nobody else was doing it. If I had thought at the time, I should write a blog about how to write themes, I'd find myself on page 65. There were a ton of people writing that content. And I didn't have anything particularly valuable to write in that space. You start by looking for an audience that you can interact with, and you start small, and then grow it. Everybody wants to be famous right away. Everybody wants to have huge amounts of page views on their blogs right away. I sat with a person and I started walking them through this stuff, and we were talking about blogging, we were talking about public speaking, and I said, oh, well, I've been speaking since I was 16. And I'm 43, about to be 44. And he's like, that's going to take way too long. How can I do it in 3 months? I'm like, do it somewhere else, because I don't want to see that result here. Start with a very small audience and build up from there. And if you're going to start with an audience, if you know how to find them, you need to know where to look for them. And once you know where to look for them, it takes you to the second piece, which is, what are their needs? What do they need? They have questions. There is a Facebook group that's called Advanced WordPress. It's massive. There's tons of people in it. It stopped being advanced about 4 hours into us starting it. I'll just be honest with you right now. Like everybody, because there's that dynamic of, you know, the aspirational desire to be in an advanced group. And so everybody joins in, and then they start going, hey, this isn't very advanced. I'm like, yeah, but you joined and I joined, so calm down. Right? But it's a group on Facebook where all sorts of people show up. And you know what they do there? They ask questions. There are people who ask me, if you're going to start a book, how do you even know what to write about? Well, you define an audience, you find where that audience is, and then you go look at the questions they have. Let me highlight something to you that I think you probably already know. Someone's questions are a leading indicator of their desired intent and action. A person's questions are the leading indicator of their intent and their desired action. That means if you understand their question, you also can predict their destination. And if you understand the question and can predict the destination, you have all sorts of content you can create to help them get there. This has absolutely nothing to do with you writing about yourself. Nobody has gone to Google and done a thing that says, let me search for rant about horrible restaurants in the 5-mile proximity of me. Nobody does that search. Yet you go to a bad restaurant, you come back, you're like, I'm going to blog about this. To what end? Who's looking for that content? If you understand someone's questions or needs, you will be better able to predict their destination and better able to create the kind of content that will help them. When you go to write that content, when you go to answer those questions, my advice to you is that you bring all of you to the article. Bring who you are. Bring your stance. Bring your opinion. Nobody wants to read another post about 12 themes for photographers that are available on ThemeForest. There is nothing in that content that does anything for us. It's just a list of links somewhere else. If you want to write an article about photography themes on ThemeForest, write the themes that I find are the least bloatware, that are the most proficient, that are the least expensive, and have the least amount of support questions, or the people who give us the best support for photography themes at ThemeForest. Write that article and you'll get all sorts of traffic. But write an article that has no voice and no tone, none of you in it, and it's worthless. You're not doing anything to establish a brand. And this isn't just about you, this is about your company too. How many of you use Buffer? Some of you, how many of you have heard of Buffer? Okay, a lot more of you, that's great. So you've heard of it and you're not using it, that's interesting, but we'll talk about that later. Offline, of course. But one of the things that Buffer does remarkably well, Buffer is a tool that helps you push out your content. It schedules tweets and push them out. And here's what's interesting. When you read their blog has absolutely nothing to do with that. Their blog has to do, they write articles that are very, very interesting, right? This is how your brain works when it comes to this, or this is how you should think about going on a vacation, or this is what you should do to improve productivity in your office, whatever. But the reason they do that is because first they know their target market, they know their audience. Their audience is all about efficiency, which is particularly why they created the product. They write content for that audience, they answer the problems of that audience, and they write it so well that people feel like, I ought to retweet this, which then brings them right back to, I ought to use your product to retweet my tweet of your article. You see how that works? It's beautiful. You want to make sure you're bringing yourself and what you know about your audience and what you know about them and where they're going. You want to bring all of that into your content. Now, some of you know that I used to say I'm a daily blogger. Over the last couple of days, I've been critiqued because I missed a day or two. I flew home from Europe after being at WordCamp Europe, and on the flight home, I was in transit for over a day. And I came home to an email that said, what's up, you're not writing anymore? I'm like, what's going on? This is insane. So I wrote him back and said, hey, whatever you paid for my content, I'll be happy to refund you. Oh, that's right. You got it for free. Calm down, bro. Which is my next t-shirt, by the way. Calm down, bro. You want to be consistent, whether consistent is once a month or once a week or several times a week. You want to be consistent because it develops rapport and relationship with your audience. Even if that audience is small, you're developing a relationship using your content. How many of you have moms that are still alive? How many of you are calling them as often as they would like you to? See, a few of you, you're good. You had to raise your hand. She's sitting right next to you. The truth is, our moms and our grandmoms all want us to call more often than we do, right? Because they remember the time when we used to talk to them all the time, and now they're in that phase where you don't call as much. Your audience is the same way. They're used to something. So be consistent. But also, make sure you're bringing some variety to the table. When I started my blog, I was talking to a guy named Chris Brogan, who's far more famous and does this far better than I. And I asked Chris, I'm like, Chris, should I have a blog? Should I have 4 different blogs? Because I like to write about public speaking. I like to write about WordPress. I like to write about new product development. And I have several topics. He said, no. Just write one blog. You're going to get extremely exhausted trying to build a brand in 4 different places. So I said, okay. He goes, in this way, you can have an editorial calendar that allows you to move between topics. Now, of course, I write more about WordPress than I do about public speaking, and more about public speaking than about products, but ultimately, it allows me to maneuver through those topics. Variety is key because, hey, if you've called your mom, you don't want to repeat the same stories over and over. I call my dad repeats the same stories back to me over and over. But that's probably because he's Latino. Maybe the most important thing, other than having an opinion, is that you develop your voice. And I'll be honest with you, there is no way you're going to develop your voice if you're only writing once a year. I watched Tiger Woods do an interview, and it was a Friday night in the middle of a competition, and so he'd been out on the course all day, and he got off the course, but when everybody else finished and everybody else came back into the clubhouse and they were doing the interviews, Tiger is still out there. He'd gone out to the 8th hole, and there was a particular sand bunker close to the green, and he dropped a whole bunch of balls there, and he just started hitting them out of the bunker and onto the green, even though on that particular day he had never landed in that bunker. And he sat there and he just kept working it. And he finally came in as it got dark, and he went down to sit down for an interview, and they asked him, hey, dude, you're still out there, right? And this is aren't you getting tired? And this is the middle of the competition, and what are you doing? And Tiger said, there is no way you will get good at anything if you just do it once or twice a week. In that moment, I felt really bad for all my golfing friends who yearn to golf once or twice a week. They're hoping that will enhance their game, and Tiger's looking at it going, that's laughable. There's no way you'll get good doing that. Well, I'll tell you right now, there is no way you will find your voice if you write rarely. You need to keep writing, not just because words have impact, but because you will find your voice. A friend that read an article of mine somewhere else, he said, I didn't look at the byline, but as I was reading it, I thought, this sounds like a Chris Summa post. And then when he got to the end, right, he's like, oh, it was his. He goes, that's tone. But my friend Nathan would probably say, no, that's just because he spent first 3/4 of the article writing stories. Which is how some of you read my posts. I know, you skip to the bottom quarter, and then you're like, okay, now what's he really trying to say? I get it, but that's my brand. You can't take that from me. Find your voice. And lastly, use every channel that you have where your audience already exists to share your content. For some of you, that includes Pinterest. For others of you, it doesn't. For some of you, it's Twitter. For others, it's not. Depending on your organization, you may be posting stuff at LinkedIn, and some of you may never log in. Doesn't matter. It's an issue for you. But here's what happens as you've done these 6 things. If you've worked it through, your audience starts getting bigger. Those people that have read your material share it with others. Those others come over and visit. Those others say, okay, let's check it out, and they go from there. And the more that happens, the more your audience grows. The comments and the questions come in, and it starts to allow you to grow your audience. It allows you to grow some of your topics. You start finding nuances of questions you hadn't thought about. You discover new needs. And over the course of that time, you may discover that you now have new channels, new places to distribute content. And so you want to constantly be reflecting on that. This is my blogging history. Back over here, I started writing every day. And I got 90 views a day or less than. And by less than, I mean some days it was like 30, which I think was my mom clicking, I like, but I can't prove it. Under 90. I remember hitting 100, and I was like, honey, my wife, come here. Let me show you this. I got 100 people to view that, like 100 views. And she's like, don't worry, it'll come down. And it did, right there. Because I decided, you know what? It's December. Why don't I write a whole series about my thoughts and feelings on generosity? This is how people reacted. And I'm not joking. I got people who wrote me letters and said, stop with all this crap. Nobody wants to read anything about what you feel about generosity. Get back to writing about WordPress. Like, wow, bro, you need a friend. And then I got back to writing about WordPress, right? Now, the reality is that this isn't any special graph. This isn't anything important to you other than noting that it's gradual, that it's consistent bit by bit. And if you take a look at my Twitter followers, right, there's no spikes. There's no special event. There's no special article. There is no viral anything. You want to build a brand? Welcome to the grind. You're going to work at it every day, and every week, and every month, and every year. And 3.5 years later, you might stand on a stage to tell your story. But it won't be because of what you did the week before or the month before. It'll be because of the accumulated effects, the compound interest of making short additive works where your words had an impact. You do that right, ultimately you establish a brand. My name's Chris Lema. I'm still a hopeful daily blogger over at chrislema.com. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and Strategist over at Crowd Favorite. Thank you very much.